So quick question for everybody. What do you do when your oldest friend starts looking at your house like they own it? Because that is exactly where Canada is right now.
This week, Canada and Europe did something that was unthinkable 5 years ago. They started building a wall around the United States. Now, not a literal wall, a strategic one. They basically looked at Washington and said, "We aren't waiting for your permission anymore."
And Denmark just issued a historic intelligence warning about American pressure. Also, Europe just locked down Russian money in a way that bypasses Washington entirely. And Canada? Well, we just made a multi-billion-dollar move to cut our reliance on US satellites.
Now, some people are going to call this anti-American, but it's not. It is anti-self-destruction. Because when your national defense depends on a neighbor who is currently, well, let's just say emotionally unstable, you aren't safe. You're just waiting for your luck to run out.
And luck is not a national strategy. So today we're breaking down the quiet revolt happening across Western democracies and why Canada is finally putting on its own armor. So let's get into it.
And let's start in the Arctic because that's where this story gets ice cold real fast. This week, Ottawa announced a massive new project, the Enhanced Satellite Communications Project. Now, on paper, that sounds boring. It sounds like a government IT update.
But beneath the surface, it was Canada planting a flag. We just signed a $5 billion deal with Telesat and MDA Space to build a purely Canadian military satellite network. For years, the assumption was, why build it? Just use the American stuff. It's cheaper.
But that cheap logic only works if the world is calm. And guess what? Calm left the building a long time ago. This isn't about faster internet for the troops. This is about our sovereignty.
Exactly. Military-grade communications are not Netflix. They can't buffer, they can't glitch, and most importantly, they can't be shut off just because a billionaire CEO wakes up on the wrong side of the bed.
And we all know who you're talking about, Dave. Let's be real here, okay? Canada looked at the last 3 years of Elon Musk's behavior, like the Ukraine outages, the feuds with Trump, with NATO allies, and his downright bizarre behavior and went, yeah, maybe we shouldn't build NORAD on a Twitter poll.
And it's a massive shift. We're saying this is our North. We need to control the switch. And we're doing it with Canadian tech on Canadian soil.
Now, why the sudden urgency? Why drop $5 billion now? Well, because the map has changed. If you watched our last videos, you'll know all about the RELOS agreement.
The Russia-India Pact. While we were debating satellite budgets, Putin and Modi ratified a deal that gives India access to Russian Arctic ports and Russia access to the Indian Ocean.
It's officially called the Reciprocal Exchange of Logistics Agreement. It sounds dry, but here's what it really means. Indian warships can now dock, refuel, and resupply in Russian waters, right above our heads in the Arctic. They're calling it the Northern Sea Route Supply Chain.
So picture the map. You have Russia and India pushing down from the top, and then you have the Trump administration pushing up from the bottom with tariffs and Canada is a resource depot rhetoric. So basically, Canada isn't a partner anymore. We're the meat in the middle of the sandwich.
And Russia is loving this. They literally went on state TV last week praising Trump's isolationist doctrine. They said his America First view fits perfectly with their plan to carve up the Arctic. If the USA retreats to its own shell, the Arctic becomes a free-for-all, and that's not good.
No, it isn't. So what did Canada do? They connected the dots. If the North is getting militarized by our rivals, and our so-called best friend to the South is treating us like a discount store, you do not build your military backbone on someone else's hardware, especially not when Russia keeps going on state TV praising Trump's agenda.
And we need to address that elephant in the room, Dave. The rhetoric coming out of the US has changed, and it's not just tough trade talk anymore. It is an existential threat.
Yep, we had Senator Marco Rubio recently implying that Canada would be better off integrated into the US economy. We had the US ambassador, that clown Pete Hoekstra, downplaying the threat, while simultaneously telling Canada to fall in line on energy. He doesn't seem to understand why Canadians are so insulted by the 51st state comments.
There's a word for that, Pete. It's called a vassal state. A country that's technically independent but takes its orders from the capital next door. And that's the option being presented to us by Trump and his cronies? No thanks.
No. And this is why the satellite deal matters. Because you cannot negotiate a trade deal if you have zero leverage. If you are 100% dependent on them for your food, your defense, and your trade, you aren't negotiating, you're begging.
Now, this satellite move ties directly into the other story that had our comment section exploding this week. The civilian reserve mobilization. People kept asking us, is Canada expecting a war? Is this a draft? How do I sign up?
Well, the answer to is there a war? Well, no. Canada is not expecting a war tomorrow, but Canada is finally expecting the reality.
We all saw the documents obtained by CBC last week about the new defense mobilization plan. The headline number was a shocking 300,000 citizen soldiers.
And naturally, people freaked out. They saw 300,000 troops and thought, oh my gosh, they're bringing back conscription to send us to Europe. Stop, calm down. That is not what this is. This isn't a draft. This is a lifeline.
It's the military finally admitting the truth that they're a bit broken. We do not have the bodies to handle a war and a forest fire in BC and an ice storm in Quebec and a cyber attack on the banks all at the same time.
Exactly. We've been running on luck. So this new plan is a whole of society approach, a supplementary reserve. Civilians who keep their day jobs, teachers, tech workers, truck drivers, but get basic training to protect Canada.
Think of it like the National Guard model in the States, or how Sweden and Finland do it. You aren't being shipped to the front lines, but you are being trained to handle logistics, disaster response, and local security so the regular forces can actually do their jobs.
And honestly, for the first time in a long time, it feels like the government is treating us like adults. They're saying, the world is dangerous. We need help. Who's in?
And judging by our inbox, a lot of you are in because Canadians aren't pacifists. We just hate wasting our time. Give people a reason, and that reason being protecting their own homes, and they'll show up.
There's nowhere to sign up yet, but we'll keep you posted as soon as we find out because judging by our comment section, we'll be able to fill most of the demand by our viewers alone.
That is awesome. But if there's anyone out there that thinks we're being a little bit paranoid about the US, all you have to do is look at Denmark. Denmark is usually the most polite pro-American ally in Europe. But this week, they broke the silence and went back to their Viking roots a little bit.
The Danish intelligence service released their 2025 outlook, and they did something unprecedented. They effectively listed American pressure as a security risk. They warned that the US is pivoting to a hemispheric security model, which was outlined in their national security strategy, which is a fancy way of saying America first and everyone else is just a vassal.
Denmark explicitly warned about US interest in Greenland. When a superpower starts looking at your territory like it's real estate, well, that is no longer an alliance, that's a threat. Now, Denmark didn't declare the US an all-out enemy, but they did say, we have our eye on you.
Now, that is a monumental shift in the Western alliance. Trust is eroding, and backup plans are now being built.
And finally, let's take a look at the money, because while Washington bickers, Europe just quietly made a permanent move against Russia. The EU locked down Russian frozen assets indefinitely.
Yep, they basically said, this money is frozen until Russia pays for the damage, period. They designed the law specifically so that one or two pro-Russian countries, like Hungary, couldn't veto it. And crucially, they did it to bypass American gridlock.
The message is clear, ladies and gentlemen. The Western Alliance is splitting, not into enemies, but into the US and everyone else protecting themselves from the US.
And here's the takeaway for us Canadians. Mark Carney saw this coming. Every trade deal, every Arctic investment, it's all part of the same map. He isn't reacting to Trump, he's insulating Canada from Trump. Which brings us to the biggest gamble of them all, the fighter jets. Everyone thought the F-35 deal was done, but suddenly it's under review.
And we know that everyone in this community wants those jets, and Ottawa says that the government is taking a serious second look at the Swedish Saab Gripen. Why? Well, two reasons. One, the F-35 is expensive and it ties us directly to the U.S. military supply chain. Two, Saab put an offer on the table that is very hard to ignore.
Yep, 10,000 jobs. Saab was offering to build a manufacturing hub right here in Canada, not just to assemble planes for us, but to build them for Ukraine and the rest of the world. And they're offering to give Canada intellectual property transfer.
In other words, we will teach you how to build your own jets so you don't have to buy them from Lockheed Martin forever. And that, my friends, is the definition of sovereignty.
And Lockheed Martin is panicking. You can see it in the op-eds popping up online. But think about the strategy. If Canada builds Gripens, we become a manufacturing powerhouse for Europe. We strengthen our tie to Sweden and NATO. We cut the cord on total U.S. dependence.
It's a risky move, sure. And the U.S., they'll hate it. But if the goal is don't be a vassal state, building your own jets is a pretty good start.
Yep, it's a race. And for the first time in decades, Canada decided to actually run.
And when you put all this together, Canada's Arctic satellites, the military reserves, Denmark's mornings, and Europe's financial firewall, you see the same story. Allies aren't walking away from the United States. They're insulating themselves from its instability.
And this is what happens when a superpower starts behaving like a wild card. People stop assuming that you'll be there. They start buying their own locks, and Canada is doing just that, as so is Europe.
And to our American viewers, this is not an attack on the USA. You know we love America. We just don't like Trump's version of America. We want that version of the United States that we all could count on, the one that strengthened democracies instead of shaking them down, the one that led for freedom and justice. But until that version comes back, well, we all have to rely on ourselves.
And Canada, look, we're not backing away from our neighbor. We're just finally standing on our own 2 feet. And honestly, it's about time.
And if you haven't watched our video on the Russia-India Arctic Pact, watch it next. It explains exactly who's squeezing us from all directions. The link is right here on screen or in the links below.
Now, before you go, quick housekeeping for the A-team. If you want to support independent Canadian journalism that actually reads documents, come and join us on Substack. The link is right below.
And a very important note, today is the absolute last day to get your orders in for the merch store if you want them under your tree by Christmas.
We've got the hoodies, the mugs, and honestly, if you have a favorite uncle coming to dinner who is a diehard MAGA fan,
well, get him one of our shirts or our Maple Mega Detector mug. He'll either love the quality or he'll hate the message. Either way, it'll make Christmas dinner very interesting.
Link is in the description. And remember, hit like, hit subscribe, and share this with someone who needs a wake up, and stay safe, everybody.
We'll see you tomorrow.
Ciao for now.